See the Roman nose on that big brown bowler?
Oh, yes.
What a beaut.
He is a beauty. These are nice. Eat off.
That's a female, that one.
That's a female, you reckon?
That one, yeah.
I'm get up a bit.
See the straight nose?
Yes, yes.
Slightly straight or slightly retrousse on the female, but definitely Roman on the bull.
Frank, yes, and Roy, before you all buzz up on the 10 o'clock boats, I wonder if I can get a bit of a line-up of you.
The man taking the photographs is Frank Gibson, and with a surname like Gibson, in the Isles of Scilly, you just have to be associated with a camera.
Right, you horrors. Oh. That's me. Now, come on, and again.
Frank's photographic career was shaped at his birth, conditioned by no fewer than 3 generations of Gibsons, all of whom had been island cameramen, forming an unbroken family chain. What has been described as a photographic dynasty began with his great-grandfather, John, who started taking pictures in the late 1800s. He was succeeded by Frank's grandfather, Alexander, and his great-uncle, Herbert, and they, in turn, by his father, James Gibson. Between them, the Gibson family have captured uniquely through their photography the passage of events in the Isles of Scilly for over a century.
Photography in the Gibson family began now well over 110 years ago. At that time too, they had a general stores in Silver Street in St Mary's. As a sideline, they started producing photographs, portraits, general family groups, and well, general scenes. My great-grandfather, John Gibson, one period in his life went away to sea. He brought home this camera from abroad. Alexander, his son, that's my grandfather then, became so interested in this art. There is no doubt about it. It was in his blood. He was attracted to photography from the very beginning. Of course, what really has stood the test of time has been their series of shipwrecks. Alexander Gibson and his younger brother Herbert, who had joined him in the business by this time, had these opportunities to get such dramatic pictures. Mine, no easy job in those days. I've got a diary written up by Herbert of many of the shipwrecks that in fact he attended and that occurred in Scilly. One of them, he mentions, is the King Cadwallon. This was a steamship that was wrecked out on the Hard Lewises. And in his diary, he tells the story of how he was walking along the bank and he met Mr. Trenier, and Mr. Trenier said, "Shipwreck boy, I'm going off in me gig."
We were the second boat to arrive. Found crew laying off in their boats, waiting for orders. Went aboard and over her, then customs boat arrived and transferred all tobacco. While absent, Alexander crossed on a day trip. On his return trip, he showed the crew the prints from my print negatives and got some orders. 1909, SS Plimpton. Fog so dense, boats had difficulty finding her. Reported by St Agnes Coast Guard. She was from London, of 2,000 tons, sailing from Dublin to Falmouth with Indian corn. Lifeboats took off crew. Alexander went on board and all over her. She was then lying fairly level. As the tide flowed, she suddenly slipped off the ledge, stern first in deep water. Those on board had narrow escapes, jumping off and swimming to the boats. Charles Mumford and Charles Hicks were drowned. Later on, a large number of men would have been on board salving the cargo.
The man with the lobster pots in this picture is Matt Lethbridge. He must be known throughout Great Britain now through his heroic lifeboat deeds.
Going back into your grandfather's time, I would imagine they were involved in the salvage of the Minnehaha, which was here on Scilly Rock in 1910.
Yeah,
because she was had a general cargo, didn't she?
Yeah, I've seen pictures. I'm sure I've seen pictures with a old Kathleen in it. You know, that was the old sailing boat.
The old sailing boat, which you still got.
Still got. Yeah.
Yes.
Well, she was up to Bag of Briar, wasn't she?
Yes, on Scilly Rock.
Yeah, she had all sorts of bloody stuff, didn't she?
Yeah.
Pianos and pencils and a pile of cattle too, didn't she?
Pile of cattle.
Yeah, they were landing on Samson, I think. I can't remember further and them talking much about it, only I think it was a good wreck for the Highlands. And there was bags of stuff floating around, like. You take when the longships, when she was wrecked just before the beginning of the war, wasn't it? Well, she was a similar sort of wreck. I mean, she carried just about everything: oranges, whiskey, potatoes, clothes, toweling, everything you could think of. Well, the first long trouser suit I ever had come from the longship. And well, you can remember it, all the blooming clotheslines all round them was full of washing every day for weeks, well, you know, after the longships was out there. And that's what I mean was good for the islands. I mean, it was just a little bit extra, wasn't it? Or I think, anyway. Of course, there was a lot of other extras as well, I think.
This is Porthcressa Bay, a very popular beach here in the summer. Most of the tourists who come here at some time or another lay on this beach. The children love going out rowing in the little boats. It's a magnificent setting, really, because the Star Castle overlooks it. One can see Tresco and Briar and Sampson on one side, St Agnes on the other. But as our pictures show, it was an entirely different scene 100 years ago, because at that time there was not the development of buildings, so that the bank looked quite bare. The one prominent feature was a large shipbuilding yard. Shipbuilding in those days was a prominent industry. There was one yard on this side and 2 yards on the other side facing the harbour. One of our pictures here on Porthcressa shows the David Otterson. She was a bark of 265 tons. This, in fact, was the last ship to be built on this side, whereas there is a record of another large ship being built on the Strand side, the Gleaner, in 1878. This really was about the end of the shipbuilding trade in Scilly. The ships themselves were owned by Scillonians and often crewed by Scillonians. Of course, they had every opportunity going to the Azores and the Americas to bring back seeds and plants, which Augustus Smith on Tresco dearly wanted for his garden, which he was then setting up. He came to these islands in 1834. Came from Barkhamsted in Hertfordshire. The story goes that he was looking around for a country estate to manage, and then he heard that the lease for these islands became vacant. So he approached the duchy and eventually agreed a price and came down here to live. After searching around for a while, he decided to build his house on Tresco. History has shown that this man laid the present prosperity of these islands. lots of people are amazed still that these gardens here on Tresco are actually still in the British Isles. To us it's not so amazing because they are tropical. Augustus Smith terraced it out into 3 lines, planted all these things, and now, 150 years later, here it is, a memorial to his foresight. Each time I come to the Valhalla here on Tresco, I stand back and take the whole panorama in because it is such a wonderful backdrop on history. This Valhalla is situated right on the edge of Tresco Gardens. It was assembled by Augustus Smith. When he first put the gardens together, he had this vision of making this maritime museum. Each of these figureheads can tell its own tale. And in fact, if one is to delve into the pages of history, they can in fact tell ghostly stories. There's the River Loon, for example, a big 3-masted bark lost down off St. Agnes. We have the Friar Tuck, another magnificent figurehead. And when you think these figureheads were on the prow of a ship, on the finest point of the ship, on the prow of the ship, and just imagine when the horror struck that they were ashore and the waves started surging over these boats, the crew were helpless. Really, they can tell a terrible story of shipwreck and disaster. To my mind, winter in Scilly is the best time of the year. January, February, March, we get some, what I call, beautiful gales. We get the wind from the south, which brings in the great rollers. Paninis, right under the Pulpit Rock, at that time of the year, is a magnificent sight. When the wind goes just north or west, Hell Bay on Briar is the place to be. Here one is almost open to the whole of the Atlantic. One not only gets the wind whipping the spray up, you get the long surging rollers coming in, so that when the spray finally hits the rocks, it flies tremendous heights. These boats are called gigs, and they are part of the history of these isles. Alfred Jenkins, himself a Scilonian, fisherman's son, has, in latter years, made an intense study of the history of these boats.
I don't know if you know the story about how when this gig came, she was brought to Briar, being a Briar gig. She was towed over and the weather was foggy but fine, and they hadn't landed her on Briar more than a few hours when they were told that there was a ship ashore, the River Loon down at St Agnes, and they went down there. And when they were actually down wrecking, another gig came along, and they said, well, why are you down wrecking on this one at St Agnes? Because there's a wreck actually on your own island. And they rowed back to Briar, and sure enough, at the back of Briar there was a Maypoo ashore there. And they say that the salvage that this gig earned on her very first day in these islands actually paid for the gig.
These gigs weren't built especially just for wrecking. I believe piloting came into it.
Well, they're actually built for piloting. That was the whole thing. You see, when the army left Scilly back in Charles II's date and left the islanders with nothing to do, so there was much shipping coming to these islands at that particular time, and piloting was the thing of the day, but the off-islanders had nothing else to do for a living, and they went into the pilotage business. And over the years, they had to get there first to get the job, and so the boats became longer and narrower and faster, and until around 1800, they reached their perfection. And well, this gig was built in 1879, and she is perfection today. There's nothing now can compare. In fact, this particular year, she's won every race that the crew in her have rowed in her.
Many people assume that Augustus Smith started the flower industry here in Scilly, but this is in fact not quite so. A gentleman by the name of Richard Trevelyan, who lived at Rocky Hill on St Mary's, first started it. This is where the story of the famous hat box comes into being. He packed off a few in a hat box and sent them up to Covent Garden. To put it mildly, he was very surprised at the price he got. And from that small hat box, a thriving industry started. This was in the early 1880s. And in fact, today, it's one of our major industries. It's tourists in the summer and flowers in the winter. The boatmen, they are the lifeblood of Scilly. The particular boatmen of my time, of course, are true Scilonians. Very few of us left now, I may tell you. But these boys, the characters of Scilly.
I'm going to trip right around St Mary's,
right around
then around the east, and I'll see a few seals, seabirds, polar bears if they're in. Then we'll land them on St Martin's, they can have a day there if they want.
There's a bit of luck we'll get close. They're really sunning themselves there today. See the old bulls there been fighting, biting chunks out of each other, pulling out over their women. Lucky seals.
Lloyd Hicks. My gosh, when you first see this man, you think, I've seen this face somewhere before. He has got the same features that was used on that on the cigarette cartons a few years ago.
Pregnant female there, third one from the left. If you hang on a second, we'll creep in a bit closer there. Those light-coloured ones are born last September. Small ones.
To my mind, he is a true Scilonian in that any subject that he wishes to get interested in, he absorbs all the knowledge that he can to make himself proficient.
Oh, there's still one or two that don't feel like they're going. Yeah, that's a full-grown female, that one on the right, the light-coloured one. Oh, the light-coloured one?
Yeah, the one on the right.
Yeah.
Yes. Fully-grown female.
Of course, they'll soon be having their calves again now, won't they?
Last 2 weeks in September.
All the rest of those are waiting for us to clear off, so go back on the rocks again.
Oh yeah, they're not going to move.
They aren't going to move, are they?
No. The others will be back as soon as we've gone.
Yes.
They can climb up on the sloping rocks.
Yes.
See, they're fairly mobile on land.
There's a nice shot of three, and one in the water. That was nice.
But these seals can stay underwater for 10 minutes if they want to.
He's going, isn't he a beauty? And they can sleep in the water. There's a light shot there of those three. Yeah. You'll often see them asleep in the water. I'll get in within 6 feet of them, they'll stay there. That's good. Right. Fasten your seatbelts, we're going in. That was lovely. I'm going to hit the rocks any second now. They don't want to move. They're quite happy in the sun, aren't they? Lovely. Beautiful. Didn't feel a tremor. That is grand. There he is. He's going to stay. If anybody wants to jump ashore now, they can do off the bow. Isn't that super? See the sun glistening on his coat. There he goes. My own particular interest is really the bird life. Maybe it's an escape for me. An escape away from St. Mary's, away from the shop and business. To be able to go out around the barren rocks. It's peace. Don't disturb those shags if you keep her this way a bit. They'll stay there. I reckon we'll get ashore. Where'd you reckon? On that flat I can get off?
On that flat bit, yeah.
That's as good as anywhere.
I'll spin around.
Yeah? To actually be able to land on these rocks where you know there's no damn telephone, nobody can get at you, and these birds, as they accept you, are really at peace with the world. This looks interesting here. There's several shags just up on the top. That was grand. There they go. I now feel very proud to have followed in a family tradition. My great-grandfather, my grandfather, my father, and now myself. Unfortunately, I have no boy to follow me. I have 3 daughters. But I'm pleased to say they show considerable interest. They love their little cameras, taking snaps. I have now acquired a son-in-law, and he is showing exceptional keenness in his photography. And I feel sure that the Gibson tradition is not to die.